Hey there, it's the real Jason Duncan. I've got a special announcement for you really quick. I am hosting the Exit Lifestyle Conference in Nashville, Tennessee, February 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 2022. You don't want to miss it. Go to theexitlifestyle.com to learn more.
But I only realize in hindsight that the whole thing had been fueled on a false foundation of sacrifice. And there's no joy in that. And where there's no joy, the end result has to be around disappointment, a sense of letdown, because you expected something that you were never going to get, which is a sense of fulfillment from chasing basically a false god. And so that's what I was experiencing. But I didn't have the self-awareness to realize that at the time.
Do you think that had, because you actually said at one point in our conversation that what you were doing was not a passion of yours, although it was providing income and it was a creative outlet, but it wasn't passion. You weren't passionate. Do you think that that's what that really was all about, is that you don't feel like you were operating in your, what I refer to as your superpower, the thing that you're uniquely qualified at, good at, gives you energy, and that you just get joy from?
Yeah, absolutely. Most definitely.
In today's ultra-competitive business world, being a successful entrepreneur or business owner can be very challenging. Fortunately, contemporary times have blessed us with resources for tackling those challenges and getting us to success more quickly than we could have imagined. Welcome to The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan, a podcast that explores how the world's most powerful entrepreneurs grow incredible companies. This podcast looks at the 5 keys to unlocking success as an entrepreneur. A successful educator turned entrepreneur, Jason's mission is to use his gifts of teaching and leadership to help others get the results they want out of life. Join Jason every week and learn the keys to grow a truly successful business.
So welcome back to another edition of The Root of All Success. I'm the real Jason Duncan. As you heard in the intro, I'm interviewing super successful entrepreneurs about how they became successful, talk about what they believe success is. And that's what this show is all about. So to give you information so that you can use the same keys that they unlock success with, you can use them in your life as an entrepreneur. So I've got an amazing guest for you today. I'm going to introduce her in just a moment. But as you can see, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm at my home studio here at Dunhaven in Gallatin, Tennessee, just north of Nashville, because my guest is in Bali, Indonesia. So she couldn't make the flight over just to do the show. So we decided to do this by Zoom. So thankful to the Zoom technology. I also want to give a shout out to the C-Suite Radio Network for helping us be syndicated on all podcast players. So no matter where you're listening to this, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't hit the subscribe button, make sure you subscribe. And then finally, please go leave us a review, especially if you think it's a 5-star worthy podcast, because the more 5-star reviews we get, the further up in the rankings we go, the more people get to hear the show, the more interesting guests reach out to me and say, hey, I want to be on your show, and the more value you get. So really, if you leave that 5-star review, it actually makes this show better, believe it or not. So thank you for doing that. And again, if you haven't watched this on YouTube, you can go to youtube.com/TheRealJasonDuncan. And there's tons of content that I put out there every single week, but there's the 2 shows I release every single week will be right there for you to watch, just like this show today. So my guest today is coming all the way from Bali, Indonesia. She's actually an Australian, moved to Bali to escape a little bit of the craziness that's going on in Australia. But her story is going to tell us a little bit about more why she originally moved to Bali for school for her kids. We're going to talk today with Janet Hogan, and you can find her at janethogan.com. That's Hogan, janethogan.com. And she runs a coaching platform called The Fifth Door. And I'm not going to give away all of what it is that she does right now in the intro, but it didn't start that way. She's had a 40 plus year career being very successful in the entrepreneur space with millions and millions of dollars of earnings and millions of dollars of loss. And we're going to talk about how she started in the restaurant business and moved into going back into W-2 employee land, and then starting an advertising agency, and then doing land development. And she's got a case study in patience, because that land development project, while it made $23 million, you're going to find out, actually took her 10 years to do it. And there's some reasons behind that. And then the '08 crisis kind of changed her life. And then she started a wedding venue. And then ultimately, she's now a very, very successful and highly skilled coach, helping people figure out their identity and how to live in their best ideal life when they go through identity crises, specifically as entrepreneurs and high performing executives. So I want to welcome Janet Hogan to the show. Janet, thanks for being here.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure to be here, Jason. And thank you for inviting me. And what about the miracle of technology? Isn't it fabulous that we can do this? I'm still pinching myself. It's maybe that's one of the gifts of COVID.
I had a friend, I've got a very good friend of mine, actually, who's been a Zoom customer for years. I don't know how many years. I just know he's been talking about it ever since I've known him, 5 or 6 years. And he's been talking about Zoom. Yeah, we need to do a Zoom meeting. And I didn't know what this guy was talking about. And now, of course, if you don't know what Zoom is, I mean, you're living under a rock. But I'm thankful for the technology. I'm also thankful that that I got to know you. You know, you and I were introduced through an organization that we both belong to. And, as it is, we reached out to one another and got to talking. And at the time you were living in Australia. And if the listeners haven't picked up on that yet, you have a different accent than me. Mine's Southern, but yours is Southern Hemisphere. So, but we got to connect, and I thought your story was very interesting. And I thought, man, you would be a really fascinating guest. So not only do we get the pleasure of listening to a cool accent on the show, but we get to hear a really great story. So Janet, let's start with this. How did you get your start in entrepreneurship?
Well, when I look back on my life, I have to say I'm really a bit of a serial entrepreneur. And I say that I was really quite opportunistic. And I'll explain why that's not a good thing in a moment. But a short summary is we started businesses because we could, not necessarily because we should. And when I say we, I'm talking about my partner of 40 years, my husband, Ralph. And so together we set up a restaurant, which did very, very well. And then just as that was doing well, we sold that. We then started up an advertising agency, which did really, really well. But just before it really peaked, we sold that. We then got into real estate development and did that really well, and made lots and lots of money, created a suburb. And all of that afforded us this fabulous mansion by the sea in an area in Australia called the Whitsundays, which is a bit like the Caribbean. Private beach next door, if you can picture that, aqua water, turtles bobbing up and down in the bay. And I realized that we'd spent all this time, we're talking decades now, working to the mantra of money first. And then through hard work and making money, we'll find our peace and our happiness. And so I got to this point where I had everything I thought I wanted and looked around at it and went, oh my goodness, why do I feel so empty inside? What's that all about?
So feeling empty after you've been so successful in a financial standpoint, what was that about? What did that mean to you?
Well, I totally get, Jason, that for some people, money is their motivation. And I absolutely understand that. And I also realize that as individuals, we have to know what our particular motivation is, because it isn't necessarily money for a lot of us. And I realized that essentially what I'd done was an act of self-sacrifice. That I thought, well, if I sacrifice myself on the altar of hard work, I will be rewarded, as if that was a noble cause. And instead, what happened, I got everything I thought I wanted, but it was a poison chalice in a way. And I didn't know what to do with that feeling of emptiness. So I did nothing, because what do you do? And I think, the universe or whatever the force is kicked in on my behalf. As the law of the wake-up call has a habit of doing. If you ignore the first one, it brings you another one that's even louder. And the following year delivered the Great Recession of 2008, the global financial crisis.
So I was going to ask you about the timing of this. So you and Ralph have been married 40 years. Congratulations, by the way. That's an amazing feat. So good on you.
Thank you.
So 40 years together in business and in life and in parenting, et cetera. And you've got children too. I remember you telling me you had 3 adult children.
Yeah, 3 daughters. And so we had all of that in place at the time of this, oh my God, what's life all about moment.
And then you and Ralph had been very successful, but in the attempt to chase the almighty dollar, it just didn't seem to fit like what you really were made for. It sounds like, is that a fair explanation?
Yeah, I think one of the big risks in running a business and being a business owner is we put so much of ourselves into it. You know what that's like because you've done it, you've walked this path. And so much rests on our shoulders. It's so different from being an employee. We really do carry the responsibility not only of our own lives, but of our employees. It's a massive weight to carry when you think about it. So what tends to happen is not only are we wearing 6 or 7 different hats, because we're having to be, the bean counter, and we're having to be the client liaison person and the creative person, the producer, the operations manager, all these roles. That along the way, it's hardly surprising that we lose our idea of self. We absolutely bury this sense of identity. And so every time we would go to sell a business, the fear was, okay, well, now I have to confront myself and I don't know what that is. So before we even gave ourselves a moment of breathing room, we'd be diving into the next business. It was almost like staying busy was a way of avoiding who we really were, or taking a look in the mirror, so to speak. That busyness and productivity and keeping the cash rolling in was a big distraction that stopped us having to identify, well, what are we all about? What are we here for? What am I here for?
Yeah, isn't that? I talk about this a lot, and isn't that funny how so many entrepreneurs and business people in general use busyness as a badge of honor, or as an indicator of success. And how are you doing? Well, I'm busy. Oh, that's good. You busy these days? You get like busy seems to be the thing. And I remember, I guess was it 2018 or 2019? I forgot what year it was, but I'm not often one to make New Year's resolutions, but I made one that year. And I said to myself, I will not say I am busy all year long unless it is 100% true, because I just knew that we have a propensity to say that we're busy. And it was so freeing to really catch myself to say I'm not busy. So I love now when people say, hey, you guys busy? Well, not really, but it's good. Like I'm good. But the other part of what you said, Janet, I think is really important. And I want to go more into your story before we talk about this. But I think what's interesting about this identity crisis, you didn't use that phrase, but you and I talked about this before when we spoke last and prepped for the show, is this identity crisis as very successful entrepreneurs. When we exit a business, we can experience that identity crisis. And for you and Ralph, you guys were going from business to business to business to business. And so your identity was changing, except for the fact that you were just the owner of the business. And at some point, when you finally stepped away from all of it, so to speak, you're like, well, who am I? And I know I did the same thing. And I really want to dive into that. But before we talk about that, what was your first business? Like, what was it that you actually did, you and Ralph, or you alone? What was your first business?
Well, to wind back a long way back in time, Jason, to the late 1970s, would you believe? And my mum had a restaurant in a street in Sydney that was in the same street as Ralph's restaurant. And hers was empty, his was always full. So we thought, we better check out the competition. And sure enough, the food was amazing. This is back in the day when food was basically just meat and 2 veg on a plate, even at a restaurant. And so this place, people would actually cart their video cameras, which were like mini television sets, on their shoulders to film the food, because it was actually the first art-directed food. And so needless to say, I was pretty blown away. So we started, going out. And then when we were together, and it was pretty clear that we wanted to spend the rest of our lives with each other, that's when we embarked on our first business, which turned out to be a restaurant, or a cafe, if you like, that was into punk food at the time. I know that's hard to believe, but we'd have punk. So that's like food that had a bad attitude about it, but it was really good food, really well made. So, for instance, instead of saying terrine de poisson, it would be like shark terrine or jaws, and it would have a little fin on it, like a shark fin, and red tomato coulis as a blood trail on the plate. Anyway, it was a lot of fun, and we got the award for the the Bent Fork Award for the best cheap restaurant in Sydney, which was actually quite a good award back in the day. But it was absolutely a labour of love. We were open 7 days a week, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and we quickly exhausted ourselves. So not surprisingly, we then leapt to the next thing that we could do. And that, as it turned out, was advertising.
So did you sell the restaurant or did you just close it?
We sold it, yeah, to a couple who we got carried away on the creative side of things. They were much more bottom line focused, and I think they actually did quite well out of it. But we created we did the hard lifting, and I think that happens a lot too. The first person, breaks the ice, does the heavy lifting, creates a reputation, and then it's quite easy for someone to step into that and go, right, now let's make it, a really profitable business.
So you sold the restaurant and built and sold a restaurant, and then you move into advertising. So was your advertising a general advertising agency, or were you specifically involved in radio, TV, or some other form of advertising?
Yeah, it was pretty general. So I actually, a group of the guys who used to come to our restaurant happened to run the most successful ad agency in Australia at the time. And I'd always had a passion for writing. So, and Ralph's background was advertising too. I thought I was actually going to go into journalism. And he said, no, get a job in advertising. It's way more lucrative. Because it was still all about money. Money was the bottom. We were now moving into the 80s, the greed is good era, and everything was justified by money and getting to the top and beating everyone else. That was the ethos of the day. It sounds so foreign now. So basically, I got a job at this fabulous agency. I was like their token Sheila. So Sheila is an Australian word for girl or woman, and they were a very male agency, and everyone said I'd last about 5 minutes, but I ended up working for them for years. And that gave us the foundation to set up our own agency, which we ran very successfully.
So you went from restaurant to W-2 employee, or I don't know what you guys call it, but in the States, you're W-2 employee. So W-2 employee, then open an agency. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And how long did you own the agency?
So we opened that in 91. We'd had a spell as freelancers prior to that. So we were used to, running down to the letterbox and seeing if there was a check there waiting for us. That was back in the analog days. And then from there, 1991 till 97, we ran that agency until we merged it with another agency. And it was really the first, if you like, creative cooperative. So we started off with this fabulous building, a very old building, and in every office was a different person who represented a different expertise. So there was an art director, an illustrator, a TV producer, there was us, the writers, and producers and so on. And so eventually it was inevitable that we turned that into, a fully fledged agency. And that's where we started, servicing clients all across the board, doing a lot of controversial advertising that we became famous for, like the first sexist campaign created by an all-women creative team that caused a stir. Again, it was very successful. But it's not what I would call my true passion in hindsight.
So when you left the agency, you said you merged the agency with someone else. I assume that merger ended with you not being a part of it ultimately. Is that correct? That's
correct. Yeah. So by that point, we had 2 young children and we wanted to give them a better life. And we thought the way to do that was to move out of the city environment and take them to a small community in a more regional area. And that's when we moved to the Whitsundays. And it was interesting because email had only just come out at that time. And our big client, our main client, it was the banana industry. And they actually invested quite a lot in advertising back in the day. And so I said, we're going to be moving to Queensland, but we'll still be doing the work. And the client said to me, we'll put the account out to tender in that case. He didn't even, miss a beat. And I said, all right, no, actually, I rang him the next day and said, we're not going to move. We're just going to go for a holiday. And I thought, how do we make this work? And so it was really, I suppose, one of the very early examples of working from a remote location. And I just had to fly down to Sydney every couple of weeks. for client meetings and things. But what was interesting was we were so determined to make it work that we were far more diligent than we'd been when we were working and living in Sydney. So it was a case of, if you're motivated, you can absolutely work from home. And for some people, that just works better. And it was very good for us to be able to live in that environment.
Isn't it funny? I mean, your career is long enough that you've spanned these decades of how things were done. When the fax machines, and
yes.
then the waiting on the checks in the mail, and then the email and travel, and now, as we talked about just a few minutes ago, Zoom is now connected a global world to a global society, and so now we can do this, and it's not even a thought of, hey, you want to be on my podcast? Well, I live in another continent. I can't be on your show. Well, of course you can.
Yeah.
We've got technology to do it. So advertising, not your passion. So you moved on to something else after you merged, and evidently you've done pretty well financially. I mean, all the indicators are that you're doing really well. So what did you do next?
So again, just looking for opportunity being the driver. And we came across this fabulous piece of land. It was about 120 acres right on the water. And we thought, let's buy it and turn it into a suburb. And so that's what we did. So none of these things we'd really had any prior experience at. And the secret there to do any development in an area that's regional like that, it's like catching a wave. It's great to buy it at the right price. So we bought it as a mortgagee sale. And then we had to actually wait 10 years for the market to be at a level where we could sell the blocks. There were 48 blocks in this subdivision. It was massive. We built 6 kilometres worth of road and all the services that had to be connected. And then we basically sold everything in a very, very short space of time. So again, that financially did really well. So then we got truly bitten by the real estate bug. And aside from that, I counted up that we bought, renovated, and sold 117 properties all in the course of our life. And so real estate really became a major part of our business portfolio.
But what did you do for the 10 years while you were waiting? Like what was your business?
So we were still servicing our advertising clients from the tropical paradise, while maintaining the facade of working in Sydney. There was an attitude then, Jason, of you don't deserve to be living in paradise while the rest of us are slaving away in the city. So we had to be very sensitive to that envy, if you like. So I would, the client would ring me up from where he was, and he was in another city, and say, what's the weather like in Sydney? And I would have had to have rung our receptionist beforehand to check what the weather was like in Sydney, because I know he'd always ask that question. And it worked fine. I mean, the only day it didn't work was when we were having a very heavy tropical rainstorm and it was very sunny in Sydney. And he said, what's that noise in the background? And I said, oh, it must be a terrible connection. It must be the telephone connection. But things that today you just take for granted, of course you can work from a remote location, were very unusual back in, we're talking 1997.
I think that's, everybody can predict anything, but you don't know if you're crazy or smart until it happens. But I think that this whole work from home thing that we've dealt with now over the pandemic, and everybody's been, essentially forced to work from home. And there are companies that are saying, hey, we're never going back to the office. And I don't think that's true. And here's why I don't think it's true. One of the companies that I own, we didn't have an office for the first 6 years. First 6 years of the company, everybody worked from home. Everybody did. And then when I got an office, the productivity went through the roof. I mean, everybody was feeding off the energy in the room and in the office. And it was camaraderie. We were friends, and we would go to dinners. We would do these things. But then after a couple of years of doing that consistently, where everybody was in the office, I started giving everybody the opportunity. Hey, why don't you work from home for a day or two a week? I did that. Guess what happened? Productivity goes back up again. And so I think it's the ebb and flow. I think right now we're at this place, in our society worldwide. You're actually not in Australia. We'll talk about where you are in a moment, but in that side of the world, you guys are working from home. We're working from home. And it's great, and we're all being productive. But I think in the next few years, there's going to be a resurgence of people wanting to get back into an office. I that's my prediction anyway. I wonder if you agree.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that because I'm fascinated by that whole topic. And I think possibly the ideal, and it's partly based on individual needs as well. And maybe that kind of flexibility needs to be built into the system without, risk of envy, but just on the basis that certain people do work better independently. But it feels like there should be at least a day where everyone gets together a week and brainstorms or whatever, reconnects. I know that, for a lot of people, just the commute is a big issue. Like, in London, I think a quarter of their salary goes into the commute or can go into the commute. So, there are major cost incentives around that too. But I feel, there's definitely a need for interaction with people in a physical sense.
Yeah, I believe that, it is my belief that God created us to be social creatures, and we want to interact, which is one of the reasons social media is such a popular thing, even though it's not social in the real life social, it does keep people connected. Now, can you imagine, let's just think for a moment, if we were in a pandemic and everybody had to work from home and there was no YouTube or Instagram or LinkedIn, and we didn't have a way to continue to keep in touch with what's going on, and we'd all go stir crazy. We would be insane. Well, we digress from your story. Let's get back to your story. So that's my fault. All right. So land development and advertising simultaneously, but it was after that decade of waiting. And my goodness, there's a case study in patience. So the decade of waiting to sell this suburb, this development, this land development, where you really cashed out. What happened next after that? It just felt like manna from heaven. At one point we were selling, I think in 4 weeks we sold 9 blocks of land. It was really, there was an amazing shift in attitude. And I think this was all brought on by, so we're now talking about 2004. The internet was pretty well established by that point. And so people were starting to get a taste of what it was like to decentralize. And with that accompanied this thing called, that first it was the sea change and then the green change. And so it was wanting to find, your corner of paradise. That's what it represented. And that's pretty much what we were selling. And that's what we created for ourselves. So essentially at the end of this very long road, we managed to build our place that was, the paradise that we imagined, that we dreamt about and, envisaged. For all those years. And finally it materialized. There it was. And I just never forget sitting in this kayak with my little daughter, Clover, who was quite young at the time. She would have been about 5, and looking at everything going, wow, we made this, and going, so what? And I went, oh no. I mean, then what kicks in is guilt for not being grateful, so then we beat ourselves up further. But I only realize in hindsight that the whole thing had been fueled on a false foundation of sacrifice. And there's no joy in that. And where there's no joy, the end result has to be around disappointment, a sense of letdown, because you expected something that you were never going to get, which is a sense of fulfillment from chasing basically a false god. And so that's what I was experiencing, but I didn't have the self-awareness to realize that at the time. Do you think that had, because you actually said at one point in our conversation that what you were doing was not a passion of yours, although it was providing income and it was a creative outlet, but it wasn't passion. You weren't passionate. Do you think that that's what that really was all about, is that you don't feel like you were operating in your, what I refer to as your superpower, the thing that you're uniquely qualified at, good at, gives you energy, and that you just get joy from?
Yeah, absolutely, most definitely. And I think what can happen in a marriage or where you have, a couple working together is that you tend to, it's like teeth on a zipper, you mesh with each other, but it doesn't mean that there's an awful lot of compromise in that process. So I was very much the person that was making everything happen, but I was kind of burying myself in the process. One of the things I think we can fall into the trap of, Jason, is just doing something because we can, because we've got a skill at it. And I might have been a hopeless business manager. I really was. But I was good at other things and good enough that I would do them, but it wasn't really tapping into my creative side.
So when you went, we'll go ahead and finish that, but I'll ask you about what happened after that. So finish your statement. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So this is the thing. I think when we don't really understand who we are, what our gift is, we always look to the external world for direction. We think, oh, there's a piece of land there. Let's buy it. We'll develop it. Nothing is coming from an internal motivation. And so ultimately, it's going to be like eating, fairy floss. It's not satisfying. And so that's what was happening to me. There was no ability, say, for creativity in what I was doing. It was all about just going, oh, look, we're making this amount of money this year and this the next year, and getting our sense of significance from that.
So you talk about the money was certainly one of the benefits of what you were doing. You were making, you use the vague term, lot of money. Can you give us a sense of what type of money that is? Because I think a lot of people and the reason I'm asking is not just because I'm curious about money and I'm trying to be nosy, but I think a lot of people who listen to this show, they understand what lot of money means, but to them that's different. And they're attempting to pursue entrepreneurship because of that. And so can you give me a sense of what you don't have to be very specific, but give us a sense of what a lot of money was for you.
Yeah, a lot of money for us. What the development gross was about 23 million, which for us coming from very humble origins was a very good result. And there were costs to come out of that. But I suppose by the end of it, we were left with about 10 million. And that for us represented everything that we needed to be financially self-sufficient, if we invested that. However, what was interesting was even though we got to that point, Jason, we still wanted to make more.
Isn't that weird? And I think that poor people, and I say poor people, and not derogatory, I'm just absolutely defining a person, a poor person who doesn't have the ability, or not ability, but doesn't have the wealth that you and I and others like us might enjoy. Look at that and say, you guys are always greedy. You always want more. But the reality is, everybody wants more. Once you get something, goals grow, ideas grow, attainment, the attainment continues. So yeah, you sold your development for 23 million. You netted 10 million. Okay, this was awesome. Let's go. Let's do more. Even though to anybody, they would look and say 10 is enough. 10 is enough. And I don't like the word enough. I really don't like the word. And we could even get into this if you want to, I want to talk about it a little bit, but this idea of enough, it's almost selfish, because what does that mean? Like, I just want enough for me. I don't care about my wife and kids. I just want enough. You would call me selfish. I said, well, I just want enough for me and my wife, but not my kids. Well, that's selfish. Okay. Well, I just want enough for me and my wife and kids. Okay. Well, that makes sense. How come just adding a couple more people now doesn't make me selfish? And what I mean by that is, I think that as entrepreneurs, we have the unique ability to create generational wealth that impacts humanity everywhere. So enough doesn't exist. It's not greed. It's the opposite of greed. I think most people think that that's what I'm talking about. But the reality is 10 million life-changing money. But you're like, wait, we want more. Why? Because you have a good heart and you want to impact the world. Am I saying that right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, if that were me now back then, yes. But me back then was a scared person operating out of fear. So that it's not enough was actually coming from lack. And so if we said, all right, what are we putting the money towards? It's still essentially, back then, it was still essentially, selfish stuff, if you like. Oh, well, we could have a part share in a jet, and that way we could travel anywhere fast, or the holiday house, or this was still very much the thinking of that era. Now it would be a totally different equation. So I'm talking as someone as a product, if you like, of that time, and that's really what we were operating under, and that's why I had to have the crash that I had.
Well, talk about that. So land development was not the last thing, because you had other stores, and now you're doing something completely different. So let's go quickly through those last few steps. Then I've got some specific questions about how that all came about.
Yeah.
What happened next?
So the next thing was after that moment of I've climbed the top of the mountain and the view sucks from up here. What next? Because I didn't do anything. That's when the higher forces took charge and delivered the 2008 global financial crisis. And so that was really one of the most painful years in my life, watching over the space of 12 months as just about everything that we'd spent all that time working for collapsed because we took out a margin loan to accelerate our wealth. And so while everyone else was slowly losing their fortunes, ours kind of just vaporized, particularly when Lehman's went down. And so my sense of self was pretty much tied up in our net worth, self-worth equals net worth. So when the net worth disappears, you go with it. And that's what happened to me. And that's where I really crashed. And that's where I had to ask the questions. Okay, obviously something is wrong in this belief that I've had. I don't know what the truth is. I don't know what values I should be pursuing, but I know that something fundamentally has to change. And it was that really, or a feeling of I'd rather not be here at all. And I think when we get to that point, we've got a choice really. We can either undergo physical death and leave all that pain and suffering behind for our loved ones, or a more metaphysical death where we have to let go of a belief that simply doesn't serve us anymore.
What was your next business after that? Because real estate kind of fell out in 2008, 9, 10. So what did you do next?
Well, we did the only thing we could do, which was monetize our mansion. So we had a $5 million mortgage and no income. So we took our mansion that we lived in, that we created, and we turned it into a wedding venue. And again, not because we should, but because we could. And so that's what we did. And we started holding weddings from our place by the sea. And Ralph and I, our lifestyle changed somewhat. We were living upstairs in the bedroom while everyone was partying down below to Red Hot Chili Peppers. Give it away now. All right. It was. I was still in shell shock, really, from the financial crash. So I had a bit of PTSD at that point. But we were managing to scrape together money, and actually, we started doing really well at one point. And we were winning the awards for the best venue, and we created systems around it. So weddings are very classically a mum and dad show. And so because we'd run, proper businesses, we were able to apply that thinking to what is essentially a cottage industry and for a period of time do very well from it.
So the wedding, now, if I remember your story correctly, at some point you moved from Australia to Bali during this time. Am I on the right time?
Yes, you are. Yeah, you're keeping up beautifully, Jason. I don't know how you're doing it, but yes, we did. The lure there, by this time we had a third child, Clover, and I'd heard on the same day from two different sources about this school in the jungle that sounded like a paradise for kids. And it was created by a Canadian fellow who hated school because he had dyslexia. And so his mission was, I'm going to create a school that even I would have enjoyed going to. And so I thought Clover had just experienced a little bit of bullying. So this was just when Facebook was coming out. So it was about 2011, when Facebook was becoming bigger. And I thought, you know what, let's get her out of this environment. Let's go to Bali. And so enrolled her in the Green School. And it was a wonderful experience for her. But of course, what happens when you put that entrepreneurial spirit in a place like Bali, where you can create so much for so little cost? You just have to have an idea, and there's an abundance of very talented people here to bring it to fruition. We thought, let's branch out our wedding business to Bali, and that's what we did.
And you did. So you're living in Bali. The mansion is still going as the wedding venue back in Australia. Things are going well. Your children are doing well in school. Things are finally might not be the right word, but there's some starting to come together. Everything seems right. But you're not doing any of that anymore, right? You're coaching people and helping people through clarity and vision and waking up. So when did all that begin?
I hadn't actually started that work at that point, but what happened, we had this golden moment where we brought in a manager and we created the systems and processes, which of course are essential, that we could actually move away from the business. So we could, to use your expression, exit without exiting. And that was a moment of bliss where we would get up in the morning and go, oh my goodness, we're still making a great income from this business and we're not having to show up anymore. In fact, they really didn't want us to show up. It was almost like we were a liability. They were happy to just run the business without us. And that was a wonderful, example of being, unnecessary. And that lasted for about a year or 18 months.
So you were able to pull off the old exit without exiting. That's great. So your business continued to give you the tax benefits and the financial benefits, but without the burden of having to run daily operations. And as you pointed out, and this is what a lot of my clients find out too, is that when you do this, your employees actually prefer you not to be around because they're like, hey, we got this. We got this. It's almost like teaching. You had 3 daughters. I've got a son and a daughter. And I remember teaching them both how to ride a bike. And I remember when I learned how to ride a bike as a child too, the dad, or usually it's the dad, but it could be you, the mom, but is pushing and holding the back of the seat and holding the kid up. But once the kid learns how to do it on his own, he doesn't want dad fooling with him. Like, leave me alone. I can ride the bike by myself. And I think our employees are the same way. We train them up. We give them systems and processes. They run the business. They're doing it successfully. They don't want you showing up and holding the back of the seat. They want you to go away. Exactly. So that's awesome.
And I think the other danger of being an owner, because you are invested, and owners tend to be fairly creative by nature, is the big idea. So we would come in and say, we've got this great idea, and everyone would turn pale and go, no, we don't want any big ideas, because these projects really disrupt the flow of the business. So the business was absolutely better off without us.
And when did you start the coaching business, which is what you're doing now?
Well, the underlying fear that I had was, and I really experienced this at that crash point, was I don't have any idea who I am, and I didn't even understand that we needed to figure that out. And so Bali is an amazing place in that this is where people come to discover themselves. It's a renowned healing place, but also in terms of doing deep inner work, there are many retreats here, and it's a beautiful country, and they say it's got a special energy about it. It's one of the countries that was featured in the film Eat, Pray, Love. It was the love component, and it is like that. It's got this beautiful energy that you could say was quite transformative. Equally, it heightens everything. So if you're in a bad place, it will amplify it as much as if you're in a good place, it'll amplify it. So I essentially just became a very a greedy little retreat attendee and went to every seminar and workshop that I could to figure out who I was, and in the process created the program that I wished someone had given me when I was at the bottom of my dark pit, a lifeline essentially. And it was called The Fifth Door, and it was really all about helping people achieve a certain level of self-awareness that they could make these important life decisions, like, should I be opening up this business? Does this make sense? Not coming from opportunity, but coming from a place of, because I have this vision and I want to see this vision fulfilled, and this vision comes from within me. So it's nothing to do with, external circumstance. And I thought, how awesome would it be to teach this program to kids while they're still at school, at age, say, 16, 17, when these ideas about, should I go to college? What should I do? They can get some clarity before they leave school. So the Green School was gracious enough to allow me to teach this program, the Fifth Door, which I did. And it went really well. And I loved writing the reports for the kids, and just to help them with heightened self-awareness, go down, a better path, so they didn't have to make so many mistakes from the get-go. But what was interesting was it was the parents who picked up on it, because they were reading the reports and going, oh, I wouldn't mind knowing this stuff about me. So that's when I started branching out and teaching the parents.
So was the fifth door a retreat that some other person kind of started and you took over? Tell me about how that works.
No, it was really, I suppose what frustrated me, Jason, was that I was trying to figure myself out. And back then, it seemed like a lot of these seminars and personal development programs were almost like Ponzi schemes, so you go in at the bottom level, enticed by a very, impossibly cheap deal, $99, to revolutionize your wealth management skills. And then you'd be upsold and upsold and upsold. But it didn't seem like anyone was taking responsibility for the client journey, for getting you specifically from a point of, non-awareness, if you like, to awareness. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I mean, apart from it's kind of criminal taking money from people without really taking responsibility for the outcome. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to create this program out of basically things that I picked up along the way, or I figured out intuitively for myself. So that 5-door model, the fifth door basically represented crossing the threshold into the ideal life. And I felt it was helpful to give people a bit of a model so that they could work out which door they were currently behind and that there might be a better life for them. So
you just kind of took the best of the concepts that you were learning by attending retreats and these things, and you were thinking, I want to get rid of the nasty stuff that you feel icky about and what they're attempting to do, pull in the good stuff, create your own system called the fifth door, and started teaching it to school children and then eventually their parents.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I was teaching it from here, from where I'm speaking to you from right now, a venue called Saratoga in Bali. And what was interesting, the parental mix was very interesting. A lot of Americans, very wealthy people, billionaires, were sending their kids to this school because they wanted them to have this exceptional experience. And so I could bring them to a place of intellectual realizing what their ideal path was. But then I hit the biggest obstacle of all. And the biggest obstacle I realized was that you can intellectually know something, but doing it is a whole new thing. And so I went, okay, we've got this problem. It's called inaction. What do we do with it?
And you help them figure out the action.
Well, this is where we get into the psychology, and this is the work that really fascinates me. Okay, so we can have an idea and we can go, I'm going to set this goal and I'm going to use my willpower to achieve it. But then for some reason we self-sabotage. And so the question is, what is that all about? And I thought, what if we could reverse engineer inaction? Where would that lead us? That's really interesting. So what is it that you specialize in working with people today? Is it around that inaction to action? Is that what you're doing? Clarity on that? That's really the prime piece, because I realized all the coaching and learning in the world is not going to do us any good if the foundation is false, if the foundation is rotten, if we're working from what I call a core destructive belief that is telling us why we can't have something. And so this is essentially, at its essence, it's shadow integration work. It's finding out, okay, what is it that's stopping us from achieving? And the good news is it's nothing external. It's as much as we can think the world might be working against us, particularly now with all the pressures that are on, the good news is that all of this is within us. And because it's within us, we can actually control the outcome. We just have to be prepared to do the work to find out what it is that's stopping us from really achieving our potential. And when we can do that, the wonderful thing is by confronting the pain of that pain really transmutes into passion. So you've used that word passion again. So I want to talk about that here in a minute, but I've got a question about something. So I'm looking at my notes I wrote down while you were talking. You go from restaurant to employee to advertising agency mogul, land development, and then the crisis in 2008 just vaporizes your wealth. Try to figure out what to do. The wedding venue seemed like the thing to do. And then that led you to eventually, when you exited without exiting, to figure out what you really wanted to do in life, which was do the fifth door, which is training, coaching, as you just described. Here's my question for you. You've been successful, at least from my seat, looking at you. You've been very successful. But how would Janet Hogan, how would you define that word success? So success for me is doing something that fulfills you, that also solves a problem for others. And it's bringing together the three essential factors, which is something that you feel passionate about, something that you're wired to do, that you're truly excellent at, and then applying that to add value to the lives of others. And it's very easy to get just two of those things and not all three. But if you can get the trifecta, that's when you're really moving from wealth accumulation to prosperity. So the difference is we were in the wealth accumulation space and it was all about us and the wealth stopped there. What I love about prosperity is that this is where you transition to living in exchange. So you're in a constant state of giving and receiving. And the receiving isn't just about financial receiving, although that's an essential component, but it's also receiving the fulfillment that you get from adding genuine value to the lives of others. As they say, when you heal someone else, you're healing yourself at the same time. So it's the gift that keeps giving. That to me is true success.
Well, with that as a backdrop for the definition, do you consider yourself to be a successful person?
Yes, absolutely. In that I wake up every morning wanting to get out of bed, not because I'm being pushed, but because I'm being pulled. And the more I do this work, the more I find myself zeroing in on really that sweet spot. And so it's a process of eternal discovery too. I can't compare my life now with how it was. I'm not making the tens of millions of dollars that I was, but I also realized I never really needed that share in the jet or the holiday house. So my life is much, much simpler on a material basis. Yet I could live anywhere and I love the gardens here and it's absolutely beautiful. But my focus really is on showing up. That's what it's all about now.
Well, I really, really like your perspective, Janet. It makes me like you even more now that I hear all of the story. So the listeners to my show know in the Root of All Success, I talk about, and I always ask the guests their definition of success. And I don't think I've had the same definition ever in all the shows I've ever recorded. And all of them are good. They're all really good definitions, just like what you gave. And I always talk about these 5 keys that I believe that lead to success. And I think I've heard in your story where these 5 keys are showing up. And I'm going to spend the last few minutes we have together kind of diving into those things. So listeners to the show know that I talk about these 5 keys to success, and I'm going to list them very quickly. The first is passion, which we're going to talk about because you've used that word 3 times in our show, right, so far. So passion, being at the right place at the right time, knowing the right people, preparation, and then plan. And those are the 5 that are talking. They're all start with P because it helps me to remember them. As a former school teacher, I know, and as a former pastor, I know alliteration helps. So, so you use the word passion more than anything else. So I want to talk really fast, and I'm going to spend the most time on passion. You be in the right place at the right time. If I could look at your story, you talked about that street where your mom and dad had that restaurant and Ralph's family had the restaurant. So that seems to me like right place, right time. Also, the fact that you owned that $5 million mansion in the middle of a crisis where you needed cash flow, it provided you the opportunity to get cash flow, even though it was accidental. It wasn't intended. So again, those indicate to me right place, right time. The right person, Ralph seems to be kind of an interesting guy and the right person. There are probably other people in your life you could point to like that. Had that person not been here, I wouldn't have been successful. You've mentioned several times about how you did it not maybe because you should, but because you could. And I think that indicates a level of preparation, because had you not been prepared for that moment, you wouldn't have been able to could do it. Like forget should, you couldn't have done it. So I think that indicates preparation. And the final is a plan. I think you parlayed your financial success in every area, which is what plan really means, is how do you financially deploy your ideas. You've been able to plan that. So all of that I see, and you can certainly agree, disagree, add color commentary, but I really want to talk about passion. But before I ask the passion question, what do you think about the way I analyze those 4 other keys? Do you agree the way I'm seeing it?
Yeah, I totally. And I see that different behavior profiles, if you look at Myers-Briggs, for instance, some people are planners and others aren't. And when you said the word planning, that was the one piece where I went, I'm not a planner. I tend to, no, I don't basically agree with just flying by the seat of your pants. It's not that. But there's something, Ralph's a planner, so I think sometimes that can come down to behavior styles. Whereas I seem to honestly, I live by faith that things do turn out for the better. And I feel that faith replaces fear. And fear is a pretty, you can pretty much assume if you're running on fear, it's not going to end well. So my planning comes from that faith that I have that things will ultimately work out.
You and I are more alike than I knew, because you and I, the way you just described that is how I live my life. I am very good at flying by the seat of my pants, although I don't recommend it for most people, because most people don't execute at a high level when they're acting like that. But I think that the way you described it, you and I are very, very similar. I, too, have faith that things are going to work out. Like when I exited my big company to go do other things and start other companies, like how many times have I checked in on them? Very few, not because I shouldn't, but because I really have faith that they're going to do the right thing. But let's talk about passion. So you use the word passion 2 or 3 times. And here's my sense. I have a sense that the way you're describing passion, you're describing the emotional side of passion, the sheer joy and attraction and connection that you have with the thing that you're doing. You mentioned that when you were doing advertising, it wasn't your passion. It wasn't your passion in real estate, land development. But I think your eyes changed and your voice changed and everything changed. Your physiology changed when you started talking about the 5th door.
So passion is actually a word that used to annoy the hell out of me because I didn't understand it. What I have come to realize about passion and why I feel it's so precious is that it actually comes from our pain. So we have to have experienced some form of pain, and we want to heal that pain. And in the healing of the pain, we find what we're truly passionate about. So it's coming from a heart-based place. And when I look back on my life and the pain that I was undergoing, which is kind of a pain of burying the self alive, that's how I would liken it to, but it's really the pain of self-betrayal. When we choose to put something ahead of the self, and what we've been put on this planet to do. And so when that's finally released and we can heal that pain by actually putting ourselves out into the world, that's when we tap into the energy of passion. And passion in and of itself, though, is unformed energy. So we have to, we can't just spray it around like a fire hose. We then have to channel it into our particular power, whatever that is. And then, of course, that power, we're getting into P words here, Jason. That power is then directed to purpose, which is working for a higher cause. But the passion is the thing that gets it all started. It's the fuel. It's the rocket fuel.
So I think that when I talk about passion, I think what most people misunderstand is that passion is only the emotional side of passion. There's only this emotional, I'm not passionate about so-and-so, so I could never be successful. That's not true. Like I was never passionate about LED lighting or electrical contracting, but I developed and built a multi-million-dollar company in that area because I had the other side of passion, which is where the actual word comes from. And you were alluding to this a little bit, but the word passion, the etymology teaches us that it comes from the root word meaning willing to endure. You could even say willing to suffer. So willing to endure. So if you're willing to endure for something, if you have this pain, as you were talking about, and you push and you're willing to endure through the pain, that's passion. That's what it means. That's the mental side of passion versus the emotional enjoyment side of passion. And I liken it to, the passion of the Christ. It wasn't that Jesus was excited or had joy to go to the cross. It was that he was willing to endure the pain for a greater cause, which you talked about. So in your life, how does that side of passion show up in your entrepreneurial story?
Passion in that sense is what gets me through everything. So it's not an act of willpower. It's very much, it's an act of heart, I would say, that is informed by spending many years not in that space. So I think the ability to persevere, this is me talking personally, comes from having, if you like, suffered in the space of not being really invested in what I was doing, just going through the motions, almost robotically, because I could. But now I am actively invested in seeing what I do land at the other side, in other words, have an effect. And that creates this passion leads to so many things. It leads to perseverance. It leads to creating something that is to have an outcome. It leads to productivity, effectiveness, all those things. It's almost like if you took it away, you'd have a lifeless body. It's like the lifeblood of a business that ignites the vision. It does everything. And it's a hard thing, though, I think, to really communicate, because if you're talking to someone who hasn't experienced that, they can get quite repelled by that idea, Jason, as I remember I did. It's a hard one. It's almost like you've got to talk about it in theory and hope that people get it. And when they finally get it, then, their business life really takes off from that point.
Well, I appreciate so much getting to spend the time talking to you, Janet, because I look at this, restaurant to advertising to land development to wedding venue to coaching, helping people through these identity crises of not knowing who they are and what they're supposed to do and live that ideal life. And so I am really intrigued by your story. How would listeners get in touch with you? So if they say, hey, I like this lady, I want to talk to her. So how would they get in touch with you?
So the easiest way is via my website, which is janethogan.com. And I love LinkedIn as a platform as well. So you'll find me on LinkedIn. And if you want to email me direct, we can do it that way too. So there's just janet@janethogan.com. So, anyone who might be feeling a little bit lost in the entrepreneurial space, or maybe they're running a business and, like I was, terrified of selling it because I didn't know what I would do, understand that that's absolutely normal to feel that way, but it's probably a symptom of a loss of identity. And that's all that's required at that point, is to do a deep dive into the self, which doesn't have to be painful or protracted, but to shed light on what it is that you really are supposed to be doing with your life. And that's really when the joy begins.
Yeah, I know that you and I spoke a long time ago, well, maybe not a long time ago, but months ago, about the identity crisis I went through when I exited my business. And I think that so many entrepreneurs who are listening to this show right now know that, as a coach, I help people exit their businesses without selling them. And what I try to help also prepare them for is that identity crisis that they're going to experience. Because if you've been introducing yourself as the president, CEO, the owner, the chief bottle washer, and the order taker at the company that you built, and now you've exited that, you still own it, but you've exited it, you're going to have a hard time. That identity crisis is going to last a while because you've been so tied up in that. And I will admit to my listeners, I can help prepare you for that. And I can tell you what I did to work through it, but that isn't my niche. That's not what I do, but that's what Janet does. So if you want to talk to Janet, go to janethogan.com. That's HOGAN. So janethogan.com. And she said you could email her, Janet@janethogan.com. You can find her on LinkedIn. Janet, I'm going to give you the last word. Is there any final bits of information, advice, et cetera, you'd like to give to the audience?
Yeah, I just say to anyone who might be feeling a little bit antsy or feeling self-doubt or imposter syndrome, or just that they're not up to the task, just understand there is nothing inherently wrong with you. This is just fear showing its face. And if you can get to the bottom of that fear, understand that core destructive belief that's driving you from the bottom up, bring that to the light. You probably can't imagine how your life can change at that point. You're really enjoying a whole new sense of freedom. And anyone who really wants to achieve at their peak potential can now do that journey relatively easily and quickly. It doesn't have to take a long time. But that's when you can really enter into the slipstream of your life and things happen effortlessly. So I heartily endorse that as someone who's spent so many decades not in that space.
Yeah. Well, Janet, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for being here. Thank you for dialing in late on your time zone in Bali, Indonesia, where you are. And here we are in Nashville, Tennessee, the United States. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it very, very much. And I look forward to continuing our relationship now that I know you a lot better. So look forward to talking to you later. Thank you so much, Janet.
Thank you, Jason.
Well, there you have it, listeners. Another successful entrepreneur talking about her journey to success. And while we didn't spend as much time on this show as we do in some others where we dive into all of the 5 keys, it is inevitable that they show up in every story, and they showed up in hers. Specifically, we talked about that word of passion and how that emotional side of passion versus the mental side of passion, and how she was able to tap into both of those to lead her to success. But I think the thing that I want to clue in on before we sign off for today's show is that with Janet, her real life and calling and true passion didn't happen until she exited her business. And specifically, she did the exit without exiting thing, which I talk about a lot. #exit without exiting. She got that wedding venue business running without her so that she could move to another country, help her kids get the services that they needed in the school. And then through that discovered her true passion as a coach, and a coach to high achieving successful entrepreneurs. So what are you waiting for? When are you going to exit without exiting? Because your true passion and true life and your true identity could be on the other side of that exit. If you want to know more about how to do that, I run an exit accelerator. It's a group coaching cohort that meets for 12 weeks with 12 entrepreneurs. We do 8 sessions by Zoom, and I show you exactly the 4 steps that I took to exit a multi-million-dollar business that had been recognized in Inc. magazine and Entrepreneur magazine and many other places. I exited that business without selling it to a third party so that I could go find my true passion, part of which is running this show, the root of all success. So if you want to do that, go to exitwithoutexiting.com, sign up to join my next cohort, exitwithoutexiting.com. I would be honored to have you be a part. I'm the real Jason Duncan. And until next time, remember, Jesus is King.
Thank you for listening to another edition of The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we invite you to visit therootofallsuccess.com to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Take charge of your business. Grow it from great to incredible. Join us again next time here on The Root of All Success.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.